It's hard to pinpoint one single decision that changes the course of your life, but for me, taking an improv comedy class at UCLA Extension taught by Cynthia Szigeti completely changed mine. The class was a revelation and gave me a new way of looking at storytelling, comedy, status, structure, writing, and performance. After her UCLA class ended, I started taking classes with her at the Coronet Theater, and those nights were magical and usually lasted longer than Springsteen concerts. Cynthia had a big old mutt named Shadow, and he would come and sit by her feet while she was teaching, and she would chain smoke cigarettes throughout the class because it was the early 90s and cigarettes didn't hurt you yet. And to this day, anyone who took a class with Cynthia at that time can do a variation of this impression. Sit, Shadow, sit! Cynthia was one of the first members of the Groundlings and started and ran the Groundling School for many years, and later the Acme Comedy School. She had an enormous impact on thousands of her students, including people like Lisa Kudrow, Conan O'Brien, Joel McHale, James Judd, and me. Cynthia was a brilliant weirdo in the best sense of that word, and she collected a galaxy of brilliant weirdos in orbit around her. She instinctively recognized each person's strength and helped us nurture those strengths. Week after week, Cynthia would share insight and wisdom and bizarre stories about old Hollywood, the strange retail store that she ran that had no fixed hours of business because it was the 1980s, the small amusement park that her family owned that is near where the Beverly Center now stands, or that one time that her brother became a rock star. Cynthia was a force of nature. When she was angry, it was frightening to be in the same room with her. I remember I was in a class that she was teaching, and I watched her glower and seethe as we put up potential scenes we'd written for a show that was scheduled a week later, and she completely hated every single thing we had done. And when we finished and we were sitting glumly out in the house of the Groundlings Theater, she walked up, prowled the stage like a lioness, staring us down one by one before delivering her angry verdict in the form of 6 words I will never forget as long as I live. Shit, 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 fuck, shit. I told her years later how terrifying that moment was. And there were 2 of the women in the class who actually started bawling. And she just laughed and said, it sounded like her, but she couldn't remember it. I visited her in the hospital about a year before she died, and she was very frustrated with mutual friends of ours who weren't doing what she thought they should do with their lives. It's very upsetting when people don't do what I know is best, she said. And during that visit, the subject of her funeral came up, and the list of people that she wanted ejected by force if they dared to show up. Cynthia held grudges in a legendary, larger-than-life way. To her dying day, she cursed Paul Rubens for some slight inflicted on her 30 years earlier. She asked me that day in the hospital, as she had many times before, if I would be the de facto bouncer at her funeral. And I told her that if people wanted to pay their respects to her, even if they were people who had wronged her in the past, I wasn't going to be the one to tell her that they couldn't do that. And she said, all right, in that case, I'm not going to have a funeral. And she admitted that she couldn't stand the idea of not being in charge of her own service, and said to me, I don't see why I should have to give up control just because I'm dead. Cynthia, if you haven't already figured it out, could be a little bit difficult. And that was true long before she was diagnosed with idiopathic pulmonary disease and told that she had 6 months to live. It was true before doctors announced several years after that that she had leukemia and again was given only a few months to live. And it was true before she was kicked out of hospice for living too long, and long before she went back into a different hospice and then was kicked out of that one too for continuing to live. She eventually started referring to herself as the beast who refuses to die and bragged that doctors couldn't explain why she was still alive. For revenge, she would sometimes say when she had enough strength to be sardonic. At one point, near the end, she told me that she wanted to be cremated and have her ashes thrown in the faces of everyone who had wronged her throughout the years. Cynthia would have lunch with a group of friends every Thursday at Cantor's after she got sick. I was a semi-regular. I didn't make it there as often as I wanted to, but I got there about once a month or so. And one of the last times I was with her in this group at Cantor's, she told me she was glad I didn't come more often. Frankly, she said, I worry about some of these people who have nothing better to do with their lives than have lunch with me every week. And I told her that we were all there because we love her. And she didn't want to hear that because real emotion embarrassed her. But before I left, she said to me, listen, promise me you're not going to stop talking to me just because I'm mean. Too many people have done that. And I can't ever make things better. And I knew that she was talking about two specific people, mutual friends of ours, that she'd been very, very close to, who recently had had falling outs and huge arguments with her, and whom she never again spoke to until she died. And I told her it was never too late, that she could always just talk to these people. They loved her. She could apologize. And she laughed and said, have you met me? Cynthia loved to hold court at Cantor's or Norm's or IHOP or Ships, rest in peace, or Ben Frank's, rest in peace. She had an answer for everything. And I honestly can only recall one time in the over 25 years I knew her when she was speechless. And that's when I called her up and told her that I had dedicated my book to her. Cynthia didn't believe in life after death, but she was open to the possibility. And she promised that she would send her friends a message from beyond the grave if she could. And shortly after she died, I was driving down Fairfax, and I don't exactly have the right words to describe this, so please bear with me. I suddenly saw all of the places I'd ever heard Cynthia describe over the years around Fairfax, at the Comedy Store, places where she was in San Francisco, and I saw them all coupled with every second of her life, all together at once, compressed into one slice of space and time that encompassed everything. And it was peaceful and happy and strong. It was like a glimpse of eternity, of her eternity. Phyllis Katz, who's one of the original Groundlings and one of the funniest people and best improvisers I've ever met, told me a story that perfectly captured who Cynthia was. Many, many years ago, Cynthia was teaching an introductory improv class, and one of her students was a beautiful, bubbly girl who clearly had gotten by on her looks for her entire life. And this girl did a scene, and afterwards Cynthia was giving notes, and she mentioned that something in the scene reminded her of Adam and Eve, and if the girl had mentioned Adam and Eve, she would have gotten a huge laugh. And the girl said, Adam and Eve? I don't know who they are. And Cynthia stared at her for a minute, dumbfounded. And then she said, get out! And the girl was confused, and she said, I don't understand. You want me to leave the room? And Cynthia said, no, get out of show business. There's too many stupid people already. There's no room for you. Cynthia once asked me to be the backup in case the friend who had agreed to give her a lethal dose of drugs to kill her if the pain got too severe, chickened out. And she said, it's just a quick shot. You could do it. And I said, I can't do needles. Could we do pills instead? And she said, no, pills take too long. It has to be needles. And I said, then I'm out. And I guess I made a funny face or something because she started laughing. And Cynthia had an amazing laugh, partly because she didn't laugh all that often. You had to really earn it. And partly because she would laugh with her entire body and soul. And then she started coughing because of her lung problems, and she told me that I was an asshole for making her laugh. And I said, Cynthia, anyone who's ever known you wants to make you laugh. And she said, I've got a list. And I tried to cut her off because by then she was taking morphine and it was making her forgetful and she'd been repeating herself a lot. And I just didn't want to rehash the argument about throwing people out of her funeral yet again. And she said, no, I have a list of people who make me laugh, and you're on it. And that is probably the nicest thing she ever said to me, and she said a lot of nice things to me. And I know that the people who were her friends, the people who made her laugh, included Robin Williams and Martin Short and Taylor Negron and Phil Hartman and Tracy Newman, and that's a pretty great list to be on. Before I took that UCLA class all those years ago, I was terrified of people, terrified of being on stage, terrified of revealing things that were deeply personal and my true thoughts and feelings and secrets. But Cynthia saw something in me that I wouldn't recognize in myself until many years later. And she did that with literally hundreds and hundreds of the students that she taught. She died almost exactly 2 years ago. And it's still true. There's not a single day that goes by when I don't think about and use the things that she taught me. So, for Cynthia, I miss you, I love you, I thank you for all of it. And one more thing. Sit, Shadow, sit! Thank you.